Hello, everyone. Thank you for our second talk of the day. This is our usual Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm your host, Noor Kyle.
And I am Mushtaq Ali, her faithful sidekick.
And this evening is a little bit different, as you'll see, just because I'm going to be taking the lead this talk, and it should be a lot of fun. I'm talking about something that is very important to me, and I think uh, this figure in history has proven to be very important to a lot of people, both Muslim and not, Sufi and not, conservative, progressive. Lots of people love Rabia al-Basri. But before we get into that, of course, we have to do our YouTube spiel where we invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to support our work in all of those ways that are going to help us move forward in helping people to wake up and stay awake in this world of sleep. So you can comment on this video, you can share it with your friends, you can subscribe to our channel, you can like the video. I personally would find that helpful. And if you feel so moved, feel free to donate in support of our work. You can do that via our PayPal. And if you just want to connect with us, stay in touch, you can join us on Facebook, you can join our email list, which I encourage people to do because social media is a pretty iffy thing these days, and you never know when you're going to lose these opportunities for connection. So we connect in the ways that we can. All right, anything else I should add, Mushtaq?
That pretty much covers everything. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, like the video again. Tell all of your friends to like the video.
Yeah.
That's important because it balances out the haters, and there are always haters, no matter who you are or what you do, somebody's not going to like it. And it helps the YouTube algorithm know that we're fun and they should spread us around to everybody.
There you go.
You haven't mentioned sessions with you.
Oh, yes.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ian. Yeah, so you can get in touch via email or via private message on Facebook. And if you're interested in something like a private consultation with either one of us or both of us, you just reach out and let us know. And we can move forward accordingly to see if we might be a good fit to work together
Yeah, you
going
can even
forward.
have a private consultation with neither of us. And just log on to our Zoom and sit in the room for an hour and you'll feel better.
There you go. There you go. Better than therapy.
Cheaper too.
Yeah. All right. So without further ado, tonight's conversation I have decided to title, Intimate Presence in the Iron-Willed Love of Rabia al-Basri. So we're going to be really delving into this specific aspect of this, at this point, legendary figure from the Islamic tradition, who is beloved by, like I said, all kinds of people, both Muslim and not. Many people may know her at this point from quotes on Instagram. It's very memeable poetry that she offers us, very quotable quotes. But first of all, I want to dive a little bit deeper into what we know about Rabia. So, this woman that we now call a saint of Islam, she was born into the clan of Adda, which was a part of the tribe of Qais. So she's often known as Rabia al-Adawiya al-Qaisiyya. And we know her typically, most commonly, because it's easier, as Rabia al-Basri or Rabia al-Basra, because she lived in and around and was probably born in and around Basra, which is now in modern day Iraq, southern Iraq along the coast. And this was back in the 8th century. So from what we know, which is limited, she was probably born around 716-ish CE. And she probably died around 801 CE. So she lived to be about 80 years old. And we have to remember that she was born in the relatively early years of Islam, because the Prophet Muhammad started preaching around 610 CE, and he died in 632. So that's within 80 years of his death. So that means that Islam, as we formally understand it today, it was very much in its infancy. And for her part, her story is one of intense, focused, devotional love, deep trust in God. And she demonstrates this powerful iron will that we tend to not associate with women of her time, stereotypically speaking. But she had a mind of her own. And she's a bit iconoclastic in that way. And she's had a lasting impact in that, you know, her particular approach to her spiritual practice inspired people down the line to really latch on to this Sufi principle that we now call ishq, which is kind of like eros. It's like selfless, undivided, passionate love. So how many of you are familiar with Rabia to some extent? You've heard about her.
Yeah, I think I read it. I remember at least one story I read about her in some book way back when. It's very interesting that she is so much earlier than people like Bahauddin and Rumi.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
She, along with Hassan al-Basri, were two of the earliest Sufis.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, you got to wonder if they even called it tasawwuf or whatever back then. This is kind of like the primordial ooze of Sufism to some extent.
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
All right.
Can I tell
So,
my favorite Rabia story?
okay, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, this gives you a sense of her character. Rabia was very beautiful. And there was one particular rich gentleman who just really wanted to marry her. And he would follow her around and beg her, telling her of his undying love and his passionate desire for only her. And one day, as he was following her through the marketplace, she said to him, "You know, that woman coming up behind us is more beautiful than I, and she loves you." And he immediately turned around, and there was no one there. And we turned back with a surprise in his face, like, "What?" She said, "If you had truly loved me, you would not have looked. Go away." That's Rabia.
Yeah. Yep. So, another little vignette about Rabia. I mean, that's a great one.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
it's my favorite because it's irascible.
but that's her character, right? There
Yeah.
is this edge of irascibility, this untamability of hers, and she's kind of a take no shit kind of lady.
Yeah, and often the smartest person in the room.
Yeah. I mean, as we'll see, right? So there's a poem that's commonly shared, but I'd like to kind of bring some imagery to life. Let's imagine we're in the middle of the marketplace, people are milling around, it's a little crowded, and then suddenly this woman bursts on the scene. And the way the poem goes is, I carry a torch in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. With these things, I'm going to set fire to heaven and put out the flames of hell. So the voyagers to God can rip the veils and see the real goal. So she's intense, like she's fiery in herself. And she is trying to inspire others, to really compel them to see exactly what really matters. And to her, she tells us what her goal is, the real goal. In a different poem, she says, "Brothers, my peace is in my aloneness. My beloved is alone with me there always. I have found nothing in all the worlds that could match his love. This love that harrows the sands of my desert. If I come to die of desire and my beloved is still not satisfied, I would live forever in eternal despair. To abandon all that he has fashioned and hold in the palm of my hand certain proof that he loves me. That is the name and the goal of my search." So we find that not only does she have this fiery personality, but inside of her, a fire is burning. She is completely consumed by this one pointed, we could say, impulse to not just seek union with God in the so-called next life, but in the now as well.
Yeah, that was one of the things I really appreciated about her is she wasn't trying to gather up to herself paradise tickets.
Yeah, like we talked about,
Yeah.
coupons from God. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm just making sure I set up my Zoom window accordingly. All right, so I mean, who does this woman think she is? How does she get away with saying all this crazy, crazy stuff? And it's interesting because, you know, she is a freed woman, a former slave. So she's also living under the stigma of having been an enslaved person. And yet, you know, she's determined to live her life her way to the extent that she can. And she's earned her right to say all this crazy stuff by doing the work. And by doing the work her way. So, one thing we have to take into account is that, interestingly, we don't have that many quote unquote facts to go on in regard to her life, who she was, when she was born, how she lived, all of that stuff. Yes, Ian.
I was just wondering, do we know anything about who taught her?
That's a good
Yes.
question.
We do know who taught her. Rabia taught her.
And that's an important point. And we'll come back to that too. So, in her time, she was mentioned by at least 2 contemporary Basrins, one of whom may have met her personally. So we do know there's a very strong likelihood that she did exist, and there is good positive evidence to support that. But beyond that, we don't really have that much to go on in terms of what we moderns would consider hard facts. We do, however, have a ton of religious biographies and poems attributed to her, and people like, you know, Attar, the poet and the hagiographer, and Imam Ghazali, this, you know, huge scholar in the Islamic tradition, Ibn Arabi, all of these people quote her, and they quote her with admiration and respect and with a sense of indebtedness to her wisdom. So we know that throughout, you know, the generations that have passed since her time, she has been a valued individual regardless of whatever the quote unquote hard facts may be. So she has this quality of legend and powerful symbolism about her. She's almost like this archetype of the countercultural, mystic, strong-willed, kind of crazy woman who somehow still manages to earn the respect and admiration and even devotion of her peers. And she, of course, paved the way for poets like Rumi to talk about love in such a passionate, intimate way. And that's important too. And there have been TV dramas, movies, songs, scholarly and pop cultural texts about her. Of course, we see the internet memes that borrow her quotes and all of that stuff. So she is very much alive with us today. And we, in our tradition, value her a lot because her way of experiencing connection with the divine, which was kind of this resistance to the popular doctrine of the time, which was very much focused on like fear of final judgment, trembling in front of God, you know, being a lowly creation, which had to be kept, you know, you prostrate yourself and you just live in shame because you're trash. You know, that was kind of the gloomy doctrine that was the sign of the times. And for her, she was just not having that. She was very much about what we now call divine love. And that's more about a kind of love that's mutually reflected between creation and God. God is the origin of all things, but there's this sense of like care and investment and nurturing and desire to connect that continues to shape Sufism today. It's one of the main threads in Sufism as we understand it today. And it's thanks to her that there was this cultural shift away from this dogmatic sense of cowering before God.
I think that's the beautiful thing about her story, and what really stands out for me is that during that time, like in the 8th century or 9th century, whenever, to come out and say, I'm going to burn heaven and I'm going to put out the fire of hell, like talking about, you know, if we're here talking about shocking people or having that shock, like, can you imagine that? Like just somebody, this person walking in the market yelling or whatever, you know, speaking that, you know, in that tone. And as I hear it now again, I wonder how that would translate today. Like, what would that term be? Because right now, most people, they're not living in that, you know, maybe some people who grow up in like a religious upbringing and whatnot. But how would that translate? How would that statement translate in today's language? What would be the equivalent of that shock of I'm going to, you know, burn heaven or the Garden of Eden or whatnot, and I'm going to put out the fire of hell. For some reason, it's like that shock would probably have to be political in some type of way, especially in this climate. But like that, and to also be able to walk your like your own path, really your own path. Like you're just making it your own as you're going. So that,
It's
yeah, that to me, that's
it's
fascinating.
intense, yeah.
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 And that's one of the most interesting things about her is that as far as we can tell, she had no teacher. She didn't have like Ibn Arabi, great saint. He had all of these wonderful teachers in his life who helped him through. Bahauddin Naqshband had wonderful teachers to help him through. Rabia had Rabia.
Yeah, yeah. And we know now that she, she's famously known as the first woman Sufi. And we know now that there were others before her. But she did not have the benefit of being in an environment where she could learn from others and be part of an ongoing tradition. She really had to stand on her own. And it is a blessing that we're finally having these other names revealed to us of other Sufi women from her time before and after. But in a lot of ways, she stands alone, literally and figuratively. So I just want to share a little bit about, the kind of the stories that are told about her life. What are some of the really important characteristics of her story, and how did she come to be the figure that she is, and what's her origin story is really what I'm saying. So
You mean, was she bit by a radioactive spider?
yeah, how did she get her
Bit by a
superpower?
radioactive
Yeah.
Quran. That's gotta
So her family of origin was very poor at a time of general prosperity. So, Basra was a coastal city, as I mentioned. That means this was a hub of strong trade, education, vibrant literary culture, super cosmopolitan, people coming from everywhere talking about all kinds of cool ideas, and a lot of cultural mixing. And there was also a time of, people were more focused on perhaps the material rather than the spiritual as well. So it is said that her name originates from the same root as the Arabic word for four and fourth. And it was a common convention at that time to name your children for their birth order. So she is thought to be the fourth child or the fourth daughter in her family. But unfortunately, either her father or both of her parents, when she's a young girl, die around the time of a regional famine. And at this time, it was very important, especially for women. I mean, really, for any child, but primarily for women of any age, to have some kind of male guardian in their life to protect them. And that's a political thing, that's a material thing, that is something that was considered utterly necessary for a woman to have a secure place in the world around her and to be kept safe. But as would be traumatic for any child, at some point, as a result of her parents dying, she's left guardianless and unprotected. And so she ends up in the clutches of a cruel trader who sells her for a pittance into slavery. And we don't know what happened to her siblings, but it's clear that they've been separated, likely never to see each other again. So the majority of tellings indicate that, having been sold into slavery, she is subjected to exploitative servitude under a harsh slave master. Perhaps in Baghdad, Iraq, we don't really know. This is just how the stories go, right? But we have different tellings about where she ended up. Most likely, it was hard labor in a household. But others say she was confined to a brothel to capitalize on her, remarkable beauty. And others say that she was a talented musical entertainer And she received all kinds of material gifts and luxuries, but her master was so greedy that he claimed them all for himself and just used her as a tool to gain and gain and gain. At some point, she has an awakening. So at this point, we don't know the details in any way on that, but she obediently labors when she has to, probably during the daytime. But in the night, she leans strongly into the tradition of night vigils, which means that in addition to doing the regular Islamic prayers 5 times a day, she spends the night hanging out with God. She's doing her own prayers that she makes up herself. She's doing her own supplications. And she's giving up her sleep because this time means so much to her. And one night, her master overhears her weeping. And he peeks in on her and he sees a light above her head. And he hears her saying, she's crying. She's just pouring her heart out. It's like the most tender, heartfelt conversation. It's less a prayer and more of her just talking to a friend. And that friend happens to be God. And she says, "Oh, my Lord, you know that the desire of my heart is to obey you, and that the light of my eye is in service of your court. If the matter rested with me, I would not cease for 1 hour from your service. But you have put me in the position of being subject to a cruel being from your creation." And she's saying, I love you. God, I would do everything in my power to just hang out with you all the time if I weren't stuck cleaning toilets all the time and being whipped and beaten and who knows, right? But she's also saying, if this is where I'm meant to be, then I will be here until you decide I'm meant to be somewhere else. But the slave master realizes in hearing this, he's really freaked out because he realizes that she must be special. She's got some kind of connection to God that he's never seen before. And so either out of fear for himself, because I don't know, he could be struck by lightning or something, right? Or out of admiration for Rabia, ultimately he decides the next day that he is going to offer her the option to be set free. And she can either continue to reside in his household or she can go her own way and do whatever she wants. He doesn't want to get in the way of her destiny.
Yeah, it's that classic moment when you have to ask the question, am I the baddie?
Am I the bad guy here? Am I the asshole? Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, she is in her heart, she cannot be pinned down. So she chooses to go free as an unusually independent woman. And some say that she went and lived with the Bedouins in the desert for a time. And that may have been her only education, if any at all. But she goes there to pray and to collect herself and to connect with what she truly wants from her life. And then at last she returns to Basra alone, and she moves into a modest apartment. And she lives, like I said, a rather unique lifestyle for a woman of her time. And the only reason she was enabled to do that is because it was very obvious that she had committed to a spiritual vocation, that she had set herself apart. And celibacy was part of that package. No marriage, no earthly romantic entanglements of any kind. Because she knew whether intentionally, consciously or unconsciously, we can assume is that association with a man would have shut down her freedom of movement in society. She would have had obligations and attachments that she would have to fulfill, and they would have distracted her from her goal, which we already know was to focus on the one and to give all of her love to the one. And we know from our own practice, we're familiar with the principles of solitude in the crowd, going one way. And she had this near absolute sense of single-mindedness on her path. But she was also poor as hell. Like, she was not making money. She was not using her, her beauty or her talents. She gave those up as far as we can tell, in terms of those being a way for her to gain people's favor and collect material wealth, that kind of thing. She recognized her poverty as a means for inner work. And reliance on God is another Sufi principle that we've talked about, where it's kind of like how would you describe that, Mushtaq?
When I describe it, I say, we work for God.
Yeah.
God delivers our paycheck.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of do your thing and you trust that what you need will show up in a way that doesn't require you to be conniving, manipulating, to ostentatiously call attention to yourself. You just do good work.
Yeah.
And
And you trust that God will move the hearts of certain individuals to help you along your way.
yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people did come her way. In her tiny apartment, it was full of people just clamoring to learn from her and to be around her, because, as we've been saying before, even though she had this limited education, if any at all, I mean, she had an immense amount of knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah,
And
she's only lacking in book learning, if even that.
what's that?
He said she was only lacking in book learning.
Yeah. And that was not an impediment to her being seen as an extremely knowledgeable, wise resource of a person. So all kinds of people sought her out.
Yeah. So what does this mean for us?
Well, there's a lot that it means for us. I think, for one thing, she was determined to be her own person, in the sense that she was not going to allow herself to be distracted by all of the stuff that tends to distract us on a daily basis. So when we talk about falling asleep, it could be, we have help.
Yeah, this is where words tend to peter out a little.
Yeah, I mean, I had my plan, but it's a lot.
Well, one of the things that we know, Osama has an idea.
Yeah.
Osama to the rescue.
One of the interesting thing, I mean, for me, what that story does, or what her story does, is number one, it invokes this, as you put it, this iron, what did you call it? Iron will or something like that?
Yeah, it's like an iron will. Hmm.
Yeah, so like this idea, the idea of ashq, this fiery passion, devotion, being a fool, drunk in love, losing your mind, kind of like just to the outside people, it's like, yo, look at this fool. What the heck is this fool doing? What's happening? It's everybody's telling you, like, you're sure you're going down the right way? Like, are you sure you're not losing your mind?
Yeah.
And her story does invoke that within me. And at the same time, her, well, two things really: fear and pain. The pain of her background, the pain of her, just that manifested in her life, just from her circumstances. And at some point, she probably decided, consciously or unconsciously, I don't, well, if decided, hopefully it's consciously, um, to use that pain as a gateway towards the beloved. Like, okay, this is now getting a lot. I'm going through a lot. It's like, what is this life that I'm living with this? My family gone. I have this master who's just being the idea of, there's no good masters. Just the fact that you
No.
have a master is like, it's terrible, right?
Slavery
Um,
bad.
yeah.
Yes.
Um, being a woman in that time, all of those things, this tremendous pain that she's going through, that she went through, and then deciding to shift her gaze towards the beloved and say, that's the way. And the other thing is doing all that in spite of fear, because fear must have came up. Fear must
Fear
have,
was a normal cultural thing in the
yeah.
sense of, if you're not fearing God, what are you even doing?
And not only that, like fearing, yo, what is this master going to do? What if
Yeah.
this master now throws me out in the street? Not even just throw me out in the street, whips me, molest, all of these different things. So deciding to, against all of that, walk through the gate of fear and say, okay, I'm going through that as well. So that's what her story really invokes within me, these three ideas of ashq, which somehow they're kind of related, right? There's like, when you're drunk in love and it's like, you're just going, this, I don't care. It's like, so yeah, it's really powerful. So, uh, yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much, Osama. Yeah.
I thought
All
on
of that. Yeah.
that. The fear was brought on by helplessness, of
Hmm.
having no control. And the way she regained control is by surrendering to the one reality. Because if she is in touch with that, nobody else can have a vote on her being, on her consciousness. The worst that they can do is kill her body.
Yeah. Yeah, that resonates. I think that feels very true to life.
Yeah.
Austin.
Austin.
Yeah, something that really catches my attention. Well, first and foremost, like she's a woman in that region of that region of the world, which is known for like oppression and just years and years, millennia of that, right? And so that sort of segues into the next thing that really, this is the one thing that really catches my attention. So if she's rubbing against like this grain of dogma of fear of God, which I would understand it as like, you know, in the Christian traditions, like I'm a sinner, you know, I'm defected, something's wrong with me. And like this fear of being judged at by God, like I'm going to heaven, I'm going to hell. Everything that I do is based on this fear.
Mm-hmm.
So for her to oppose that, so for example, right now somebody says something to me or does something to you and you refuse it. It's like an impulse. I just refuse it because I don't like that. But when somebody does it and somebody opposes a dogma like religion and they do it with such conviction, you naturally start to question like she knows something, like she's experienced something. And I think, and I'm pretty sure people around her would notice that and be drawn to her. Like, she's not saying this just out of just this refusal. She's saying it because she's had this actual experience. Like, something visceral is within her, and it's really, I don't know. I guess that would be the one thing that would turn people into like disciples of a follower or like just followers of a certain person, this person that's creating their own way. And that's something that is probably found in a lot of traditions and maybe in the Christian tradition. I haven't found anyone like that yet. That's the one thing that really like catches my attention.
I think there are. I wish I had names at the ready to offer you, but there have been comparisons made between
Meister
Rabia.
Eckhart.
What's that?
Meister Eckhart.
Um, what about him?
That's somebody who has the same sort of love of God quality.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking of medieval women Christians.
Yeah, for that, there are a few. Of course, there's Hildegard, um, who was definitely an ecstatic in that same sense.
Teresa of Avila, perhaps. I mean,
But
there are a few.
yeah, the Muslims did not have that concept of original sin that has bogged down the Christian church. They didn't believe that they came in guilty and filthy and already condemned to hell, and only by saying the magic words would they be freed. They understood that they came in fine and then they got themselves dirty, and it was their job to clean themselves up, which is a little bit different, but still you have the idea that you're working to get someplace, working to get to paradise, working
Yeah.
to avoid hell. And Rabia rejected both of those just flat out.
She did not want the paradise coupons. Not
Yeah.
interested. She would rather trade them in for nearness to God, union
Yeah. Do
with
you
God.
remember that one famous saying of hers, Noor?
Which one's that?
That if I love you for desire.
Yeah, I'm gonna quote the whole poem
Yeah,
shortly. Yeah.
please do, because that kind of is the crux of this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's time for me to mention
Well,
that.
Cherie has a thought before you.
Sure. Shri.
I don't know this woman.
There you
but
go.
the expression of what you're talking about makes me feel that, is it possible that God wanted to use a woman who was at her lowest stature in the culture to demonstrate that the connection to God is direct and it isn't impeded by your status? And so she was the lowest example of that. And so God wants to actually show that connection is for everybody, and her unwavering demonstration of that has lived to this very day is very powerful for everyone, but very powerful for women to be able to speak, that she isn't distracted by book learning or anything. She just has this direct experience. The end. It is her. That's why she is so focused. And the trust in God that she is provided for, whether she has enough food or where she's living or anything, she is still poor, but all her needs are met. To live to 80, such a poor woman, I think that is quite extraordinary. So there's something that her demonstration of the way she has been chosen by God to demonstrate that direct connection is what I'm getting out of this.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. She was chosen by God and she chose God.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's mutual.
Yeah, she recognized it, and it's not like a fantasy or anything, and the quality of the genuineness of her livingness, her beingness is clearly demonstrated to everybody who witnesses her. And so that may confuse people, that, you know, she hasn't read anything, or she doesn't have a lot of money, or she doesn't have the right clothes, or she doesn't have a husband. I mean, that's a very powerful thing, to forego those things, because that's your security. Her security lies in leaning into God.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Shuri. So Jonathan wanted me to reread the beginning, and then I want to share an anecdote of, you know, there's this sense of, you know, not only does she love God, but God loves her back, and shows that. So I mean, God loves her despite, quote unquote, despite her saying things like, I carry a torch in one hand and a bucket of water in the other. With these things, I am going to set fire to heaven and put out the flames of hell, so that voyagers to God can rip the veils and see the real goal. So this little, it's folklore, but it makes a really powerful point.
And it makes a valid point for her.
Yes. So
Jonathan, speak to us.
You know, it was the other poem in the preamble.
Oh, the poem.
I really want.
I know the one that you're talking about.
Yeah,
I can
I
read
wanted
that
to
one
comment
real
on
quick.
that, please. Thank you.
Okay, so this is the one where she's talking about the stars in the sky, I believe. Let me see if I can pull that up. All right. So she says, oh my Lord, the stars glitter and the eyes of men are closed. Kings have locked their doors, and each lover is alone with his love. Here I am, hidden alone with you. And this was, you know, in her private moments, this is the kind of relationship she had with God. Outside, she was really, you know, fighting to have people see that they did not have to be focused on fear. They didn't have to be focused on the paradise coupons. They could seek this connection, right? And she was trying her best to help people see this. But at the end of the day, this is what she's experiencing. And it doesn't matter whether other people experience that or not. She can't help that. But this is her relationship with God.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for highlighting that, because
I did want to comment on that poem,
sure,
if I may. There's great sadness in that poem to me, and yet there's optimism in it. It appears to me that she is a queen among women, and that a natural complement would have been a king among men. But her circumstances in life, or resulted that she never found a natural complement, which is a sadness. And that she says, here I am, hidden, alone with you. The optimism is she has found God and can be with God. Yet there's a sadness. I'm alone here with you. I feel there's a deeper yearning of, I wish I could be here with my natural complement in a man, together as one, here with you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I mean, it's interesting because throughout the corpus of the work that we have from her, we actually get the sense, you know, there is this longing. There is absolutely this sense of loneliness and isolation. But she is not satisfied with worldly love. She rejects it because she knows it won't satisfy her. And she actually has all kinds of men proposing to her, even up into the governor of Basra. And he offers her jewels and glamour and riches and property. And she's like, dude, I don't want it. Give it to people who need it, basically.
Yeah.
Give it to people who care for those things, so you can relieve their suffering, perhaps.
You could make an argument that she did have a natural complement in Hassan al-Basri.
Yeah.
There are a lot of stories of them together that suggest that their relationship was pretty deep. Usually he's the butt of one of her jokes, which I find interesting. But he's also a great Sufi of his time. And some say they never met. Who knows? But if they did, it would have been a relationship like that of Francis and Claire, if you know what I'm referring to. Those of you who have had Catholic exposure, St. Francis of Assisi had a love affair with Claire, who created the Poor Sisters that were the complement to the Franciscans. And it wasn't a physical love affair, but it was definitely a love affair. See the old 60s movie, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon.
Mm.
But it is obvious that for her, the entirety of her life, her real beloved was the truth, was God.
Yeah.
So who knows? We wasn't there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? We don't know where her final resting place is. There are claims made that it's in Jerusalem, that it's in Cairo. It's probably somewhere around Basra. But we know that she doesn't care where her body is, because she has been united with her beloved. And that's, God willing, she has been. And that's ultimately what she wanted. That's the only thing she really wanted. And I want to read another poem. Lord, if tomorrow on Judgment Day you send me to hell, I will tell such a secret that hell will race from me until it is 1,000 years away. Oh Lord, whatever share of this world you could give to me, give it to your enemies. Whatever share of the next world you want to give to me, give it to your friends. You are enough for me. Oh Lord, if I worship you from fear of hell, burn me in hell. If I worship you from hope of paradise, bar me from its gates. But if I worship you for yourself alone, then grace me forever with the splendor of your face.
There should be thunder or something after that.
Yeah. So this poem, along with the saying, I was a hidden treasure, and I love to be known. Thus I created creation that I may be known to them. It was these two sides of the same coin that were why I ended up becoming a Sufi in the first place. Because I was like, this is where I live. This is where I want to live. I can't resist this. This is my home here, you know? And that's what opened the door for me to be a quote unquote person of faith. If this is the kind of relationship one can have with God, I agree with Rabia. It's the only one worth having. Because, I mean, it says that God is the giver and the receiver of love. And the human being underneath all of the quote unquote detritus that we collect over a lifetime, we are givers and receivers of love. And that's, you know, that's how we create this manifest experience of love, this ishq that we were talking about earlier. It's this inherent erotic impulse. It's desire for connection, to be witnessed and to witness. It's all of those things. And really, that's Rabia's legacy to us. To have called attention to that and to make it feel real, so that perhaps we might follow in her footsteps. Osama?
Wow, that was so beautiful. Thank you for sharing what inspired you to, or attracted you, you know, on your path. That's it's a blessing to hear that from people, because you really get to see, it's like being introduced to that person again. So thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. And what also came to mind of this ashq, this what was it? Being a fool in God. Not knowing, a fool in God doesn't know which way is right and which way is wrong. All they know is to act. They just act. They go. I don't know if this action is going to get me closer to heaven, to hell, to bad, good, wrong. All of that is kind of suspended. But action is not suspended. So there's always action towards knowing God and knowing oneself, really, and then having that gate open to God as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about al-haq and loving the truth. This is what that looks like to me. Whatever it takes. Ajit?
Hi, here it is.
Hi, how are you? Did you have something you'd like to share?
No worries.
Yeah.
So this morning, the talk was very simple. Step-by-step way to get to a particular place. Breathe like this, do that. You get the result. This is the antithesis of that. There is no way you can breathe to give you what Rabia had. There is no prayer you can pray. And yet she teaches us how to come to the same place that she did.
Yeah.
You had a thought, Noor?
I think she, in some ways, I see the teachings as we know them today in what she was trying to convey to her students.
Yes, she laid the foundation.
Yeah, I mean, as I think about it, it's like her external mission. We know what her internal mission was, but her external mission was to encourage others to work on their being present with God. And she would urge them to examine and reject all the everyday stuff, the people, things, concerns that would get in the way of that. She would call people out. And she was pretty hardcore about it. And this is all self-observation, self-remembrance, self-witnessing, as we would call them today, but just in kind of this primordial form. But she was always examining herself. She would call herself out when she would space out and forget God for a moment. And she had a heartfelt sadness when that would happen. And she would try to do better. And that's not unlike what we're doing.
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned that she had students, because one of the things I was wondering is, did she actually form a school in any way?
I don't think she formed a school. I think people just followed her around, bothering her until she taught them stuff.
Yeah, they just showed up and crowded her apartment.
Yeah, who was that one guy, Noor? Sufyan, was that
Sufyan Thawi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he was a pretty heavy hitter jurisprudential scholar in his own right, and he had the sensibility to really value her. He considered her a mentor, despite his, big old fancy education and whatnot, and the fact that he was a teacher in his own right. And by the way, he taught men and women, which was not exactly common in its time. But he respected her, and he considered her a mentor and a friend.
And that gets us to one of the cruxes of this. Consider one of the things that Rabia shows us is that we need more women teachers. We desperately need more women teachers.
Definitely, yeah.
And in some ways, it's an uphill battle, not because you can't have women teachers or it's hard for women to teach. It's hard for some men to listen.
It was an uphill struggle for Rabia in the sense that it is a miracle that we know of her, because it was so common for women not to be taken seriously, both in general and specifically as Sufi women, because it was considered that, they can't put the work in, they're just so flighty and they can't focus and they're emotional and they whine about things and they care about petty stuff. It's like, why waste time on
guys
that?
would never do that.
Right. That's the funny part. But we do have biographers like Al-Salami who made a point to speak about male and female teachers being equals. And not just being equals, but, you know, sometimes women were remarkably skilled at being teachers and had this remarkable spiritual power that did put them above everyone else.
Yeah. Our last teacher, Noor's and mine, was sent by his primary teacher to two Bektashi sheikhs who were husband and wife. And he was sent to learn from them. And the woman was the leader of the group. She was the head honcho, and her husband was her sidekick. And it's still a little hard to find that, but it's out there. It needs to be more out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing that has been painful for me in researching for this talk and also just in general is the fact that there aren't a lot of resources on women teachers, especially not from the past. It's like they're invisible. And so it's hard to see myself in a tradition that is a millennium old. But we know that they're there.
Yeah.
So we kind of, even if we can't read about them, we have to sense their presence nonetheless.
And Jonathan has his hand up.
Yeah, I think in the world of the heart, women are the natural leaders, but it's difficult to get the teaching over because the world of emotions that don't use words, don't use actions. It's something you've just got to experience.
Yeah.
Difficult to teach that in like a lecture form as a classic teacher.
Yeah, except that there have been a lot of women who can hold their own in that realm too. Hypatia of Alexandria comes to mind as a woman who could meet any man on an intellectual level and kick the snot out of him. And, you know, history is full of those people, but we don't notice.
Mm-hmm.
The Quran, when it talks about men and women, talks about them equally, believing men and believing women, submitting men and submitting women. It doesn't just talk about men and women. It doesn't say logical men and emotional women. And well, Noor has a heart as big as the great outdoors. She is also very, very smart. And anybody who doubts that is in for a surprise. I can speak as one of the surprised.
But part of my practice is expressing that. And just as Rabia was growing up in an environment where women expressing themselves was not very well supported, you know, to some extent, I've experienced the same thing. As many of us have. To a large
extent, you've experienced the same thing.
Well, like Rabia, it's important not to dwell on the ways that we've been disenfranchised so that we can empower ourselves. Yeah. But it is a struggle. It's a continuous struggle.
Yeah. There have been times where Noor and I have gone someplace to visit some teacher who's invited us over, and they will just sit and look and talk to me and ignore her.
I'm already, you know, I'm just automatically shaking my head because those moments are disturbing.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to take that with grace.
Yeah. Or we go to a Sufi meeting of a different tariqah, and they expect Noor to go and help make the food for the men while we all sit around and be spiritual. And this is Sheikha Noor, who is a rank higher than theirs, I will tell you. And they don't notice that because she's just a girl and probably has cooties.
Cooties, girl cooties.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how some men behave, you know, at the masjid. Sister, your spot is over there in that dark corner with the raggedy carpet. That's for you. I've gotten that before. It's heartbreaking. But again, you know, it's all grist for the mill. And we don't take it lying down. We really have to find ways to use it as part of our practice to not just get bowled over by people's ignorance.
I sort of question whether that's done consciously or unconsciously by men. And I think for the most part, it's a very unconscious tendency to do.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so ingrained. You can just tell it's nothing malicious per se, but it's just so normalized.
Right. That's just like, it goes back to the core of the teachings. Like, are you awake or are you asleep? And how are you presenting that? Or how are you acting out in that way when it sounds like this is the core of everything, like waking up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
and it triggers my sleep too, to encounter that kind of sleep.
Yeah, and it's kind of what I said last week. It's like what people do in their mechanicity just never fails to surprise. Even when I do it, and when I'm quote unquote asleep, I'm just like, oh, there you go again. Like, so hey, hats off to you, Nor. You do a phenomenal job. I really enjoyed today's talk and how you express and how you explain and how you do it all the times. And
that means a lot,
very,
Austin.
very happy. Yeah, very happy for sure.
Yeah. And now we have answered the question, can you do this path by yourself? Rabia says yes. She also says, it ain't easy, sucker.
Yeah. It sure wasn't for her. Any questions? Yeah, Shuri, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with Austin about what he just said then, that it's fantastic that you bring these things up. I'm dealing with somebody who's been in a Gurdjieff school for decades, and he is objecting to me speaking up in a business arrangement. And I thought this was really interesting, but it's now the third time that we've had what I would call a fierce discussion, and the pressure that someone puts on you to shut up, put up, go and make dinner, all those sort of things, the classic thing. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? And I'm speaking.
Especially considering that you have more business sense and experience than either of them put together.
Well, that was a real challenge when I was working in that time too, but I was very young, and instead of people thinking that I was an adult, I did look 12, so that was a bit of a challenge. But for me right now, the testing, like God is testing, how true are you to your core and your belief and so forth. And so I'm not allowing this person to overtake me as such. And so each of these three very, very strong conversations that we've had, I've now found out he's started calling me names to other people, and I'm going, wow, how do I feel about that? And I thought,
feel like he is at your effect.
Well, I just thought, I was super mad in the beginning, and then a compassion came up in me, and I thought, oh my God, this person feels he's been practicing for such a long time and that he's got it over me. And yet he is asleep. He is asleep. And I just thought, okay, so he's asleep. I can't expect him to change if he doesn't want to change, and he doesn't want to do a certain thing or behave properly or treat me with respect. I can't expect that from him. So do I keep dealing with him? No. So I thought, 3 strikes, you're out. I don't have to deal with you. I understand you. I can feel you, and I can recognize that mechanical behavior. So that just makes me feel like, okay, God threw me a test. Thanks. And it just made me think, aha. So the compassion towards him was not to think the worst of him, but I think I feel that there is much work to do in both of us. But I didn't take it on as my offense, but I thought I don't have to be in this person's company, and he doesn't have to come to my house anymore. So I thought, that's okay. Because, you know, we're still, if we're expressions of God, if we all got that connection, we've talked about this before in previous talks, you know, you are allowing yourself to be God's expression, then how you're behaving and as taking action, yeah, there it is. You know, what actions are we taking? I think that's really the purpose of that.
Agreed.
Not a bad thing.
Sounds tough, Cherie. Thank you for sharing that, but
it's just life. And you think,
exactly,
it's life. It's just the way it is. But that sense of centeredness and being able to go, no. And I actually said, this is a hard no. And everybody's gone, oh, you know, aren't you going to compromise a little bit? No. You need to do something I am not prepared to do. No. Didn't yell, didn't go off my nut. Could have, used to, but I thought, no. And everybody now thinks I'm a bitch for doing that. I'm thinking, no.
Yep.
Right. It's quite a relief, really, because I had to go into, well, how does this feel? You know, we're talking about how we're feeling instead of thinking about it. I thought, how do I feel about that? Whew, dodged a bullet. That's okay. Yeah, I can put my energy.
Let's see. We have heard from just about
Thanks, Cherie. That's awesome.
everyone.
Props to you.
Whitney, do you have any thoughts for us? Questions? Answers? We'll take answers.
Well, a lot has come up, but I think what I noticed about her story was her poverty. Like, she didn't have much, and so what she had was inside of her and her relationship with God, and how much she lacked in, you know, world 48, in the physical, the horizontal plane. Just that lack there almost like elevated this internal spirit that she had, and was able to have a really deep relationship with, I don't know, truth, with something deeper and internal. And so I don't know, it's just making me wonder about you know, particular eyes in me that are seeking comfort via you know, material things, and how that is a way to stay asleep, to give myself to, you know, what culture expects of me, or stuff and things, or, you know, so and so down the street is saying. So I just thinking about poverty, and how much we work against that, but how much of a gift it actually is. So just, and I love everyone's stories. I love listening to it all. So thank you.
So we talk about spiritual poverty, which is different than material poverty. The richest person in the world, I guess that would be Elon Musk, is spiritually impoverished. Nothing,
Desperately.
nothing on the inside, as far as we can tell. And we know people who know him who give us accounts. So I can say that with a fair bit
pretty
of
confidently. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
he's not the richest these days.
yeah, I lose count.
The guy who's the richest is the boss of LVMH,
Oh
Okay.
wow.
the
Okay.
luxury goods.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But
At least that was the last I heard, which was fairly recent.
yeah.
Yeah.
The point
Anyway.
being, though, is that Rabia had spiritual poverty, and though she had nothing, everything that she needed was provided for her. That's the most interesting thing. That if she needed food, food would manifest. If she needed new clothes would manifest. If she needed a place to stay would manifest. And I hate to use that word because it's so damn new agey, but it's the most accurate way to say it. Things happen. Events arrange themselves through coincidence and synchronicity to provide what she needed.
Yep. And whatever she got, she often gave away. And because of that good faith, that, good rapport that she was building with people just by being who she was, people returned that generosity.
Yeah. And the big thing is she had no attachment
Yeah.
to those things. And I think that that's edging up on what you were suggesting, is that
Whitney.
yeah, Whitney, that the attachment to these things, to think that you need it, can get in the way. And I like your example of level 48. That's a Gurdjieffian term for those of you who don't recognize it. It's the plane upon which humans are living when they're not quite doing the work, but they haven't sunk to the level of 96. It's where we're supposed to start in the work. So the everyday world.
Fresh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Other thoughts, other feelings?
I just wanted to mention that I've been trying to think of examples of other women who I might know, who I might have heard of, who are kind of perhaps somewhat similar. And the only one that really springs to mind is Mirabai.
Yeah, Mirabai would be one. Lala, do you know her?
No.
She was another poet of the Baal tradition. There is Ibn Arabi's main teacher, the old woman of Sevilla. I forget her name, but he marked her as his most important teacher of the time. So it happens more often than we know, but it gets written out of history all too often.
Yep. Yeah. But that's why we pull these stories back in, right?
Yeah.
To our time, to retell them and retell them.
So if you want the straight path, do what Rabia did. And just realize that it will cost you everything.
Mm-hmm. Osama? Oh, Whitney too. And then, yeah, Osama and then Whitney, sorry.
Yeah. So it's interesting, like, hearing your encounters, Noor, and obviously Cherie, and probably many others. And this idea, from Rumi, where he mentions, on the path, you gotta ruin your reputation. you got to make sure your reputation is, you know, ruined. It's in the floor. And then you have someone like Al-Ghazali, who's also, you know, this philosopher, scholar, who leaves everything behind and ends up being a janitor at a mosque for like, I don't know, 13, 15 years or something like that. And that makes sense when the person has this kind of reputation, right? It's, you know, Rumi's already a scholar. He was a judge. He was all of that. Ghazali was, you know, was a scholar and probably a judge as well.
Oh yeah, he was definitely a judge.
Yeah. So for somebody like Rabia, that would not apply. Ruin your reputation, right? That part of the path would not apply. So for her, it's like, no, I'm gonna walk in a room full of men, and I'm gonna have men walk around me so that I'm teaching them. Again, obviously it's not coming with this attachment to that, but the path now takes kind of like the opposite or the mirror opposite of what Rumi or Al-Ghazali would say. You know, so like I would imagine if if I'm sitting in a room and the sheikh or whoever, the teacher, is talking to the person that I'm with and not to me, like, bro, what's like, we're gonna have a problem. Like, what kind of disrespect is that? Like, and that's the thing. It's like sometimes people will talk about, oh, but you know, adab, this politeness or this thing that has to you know, that we gotta follow, but that will not apply in that situation. Adab will not apply. This um, wait, how would you translate adab? Like what is it?
I would say like etiquette or like
Like,
norms.
Yeah.
It's more like etiquette though, you know.
Yeah, proper
yeah,
behavior.
Yeah.
proper behavior. Well, that's a good translation, because the proper behavior for that would be, hey, bro, you're being disrespectful. Like that would be the proper behavior, right? But again, for some of the for some people, and you know, sometimes we all can feel some part of that, it's that's it, this rigid fixation around how things or how the way should be, and it just gets lost. A lot of things get lost, you know. So I just wanted to, you know, to point that out, that her way is uniquely hers, while Rumi and Al-Ghazali is uniquely theirs. Like, and it might look completely opposite of each other, but they're both going to the same place.
I love that. Thanks, Osama.
Whitney had a thought, and then I want to get to what Austin said.
Yep.
I just wanted to comment on the first poem that you read, which she was talking about setting fire to heaven, and that reminded me of the conversation from this morning of, you know, attachments to these ecstatic states and setting fire to that false ideal. And so I wonder what, because I forget, what did she say she had for what it was going to do to hell?
She's
gonna
gonna
put out
douse out the flames.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then on the opposite coin, you know, us having these illusions of, you know, the ecstatic state that we need to be in, or this, you know, lower stage, just kind of turning them on their heads and speaking to some, you know, dream that we're in, and, you know, setting on fire, or, you know, putting out the fit flames, because it's not this and it's not that. But
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is making, I'm pretty sure, Noor as well, but me particularly happy because you obviously were paying attention in both of these talks.
Yeah. I mean, underlying this talk, there are a lot of threads for me from this morning too. So it's really nice to have that recognized.
And Austin remarks that it reminds him of Jeanne de Salzman. And yes, that was, she was Gurdjieff's dance mistress. He trained her specifically. And if there were any inheritor of the Gurdjieff tradition, she would be the one, not any of the other guys, all of whom say, I'm the inheritor of the Gurdjieff tradition. No. Madame de Salzman was the person who really understood his work. And interestingly, there were the women of the rope as well. This was a group of, by and large, lesbian women in the 1920s and 30s who Gurdjieff taught separately from the rest of his students.
And they were like famous authors and
famous
stuff.
authors and artists and all of this sort of thing. They were all genius level people. And he worked with them very, very closely for a long time. And I think
treated them like freaking human beings.
Yeah. Treated him better than most of his students.
Right. Yeah, I did notice that. It's fascinating.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think they still exist. I read a blog post of someone who I'm gonna tag it into the group where he was talking about Beelzebub's Tales. It was such a beautiful like story that she had written, and she mentions the rope sister, I forget the name, but
Yeah.
I think there's still some residue of that, and that's incredible, right? Like that's just
I know that several of them became teachers after he passed, and I think they have all passed away, which is a shame because I had a list of them that I would like to have met, but yeah, that particular line of transmission is still existent as far as I know, quietly behind the scenes.
Yeah, that was to my knowledge, that was like towards Gurdjieff's like later years.
Yeah.
He was just specifically working with that group. So I think they got like the I want to say the wise Gurdjieff. He was wise beyond his years, but like at that time of his life where he's ending it, or coming to that point, they're getting really an essence of what he's been teaching his whole life.
Yeah, the spirit of the thing, him at his most mature.
And for those of you who don't know, find a book called Undiscovered Country, which was written by one of the ladies of the rope. Anyway, we've been going on now for a while.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more.
Yeah,
we
could share go at least another hour with this, just digging down into how did Rabia do it? How can we emulate her if we have enough courage?
But perhaps that's a conversation for another time. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's been really lovely and a really wonderful opportunity for me as well. It means a lot. So whether you're here live or watching on the replay, I thank you. And are we on Brady Bunch mode?
We are now.
Yay! Okay, so we will be back next week as always. But in the meantime, take good care of yourselves, and we can wave to each other, wave to everybody watching on the replay, and we'll be together again soon. Take care. Bye.